songs like Eve of Destruction. Now it is all coming closer again, and for the best of reasons, I think. People of all ages are feeling the pull of a time when leaders spoke of values, when people sat around and argued the great issues of war and peace and the individual versus the nation. We looked with envy at a time when people thought big and put their competing hopes aside. Well, today, we have a president who never speaks of right or wrong, who never cites a moral compass for himself or our country. He acts as if the only thing that matters on this earth is the act itself, his act. That's Hardball for now. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
When you talk about innocent, I am truly not involved in any form of collusion with Russia.
The president's bodyguard grilled on the Hill.
I'm no stranger to putting my hands on people.
New Russian contacts in the bombshell testimony of Carter Page.
It was one of the weirder depositions I've sat through.
And how the Page testimony supports key portions of the infamous Steele dossier.
I think it's very sad what they've done with this fake dossier.
Tonight, my interview with the top Democrat on House Intelligence, Adam Schiff. Then how the CIA is engaging with conspiracy theorists as directed by the president. And as polls close in Virginia and New Jersey.
This is massive.
My interview with Donna Brazile on the new book that is rocking the political world. It All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. All right, it is election night across America. We have a call at this very hour. NBC News right now projecting that Democrat Phil Murphy will win the race for governor in New Jersey and will replace Chris Christie as governor. Meanwhile, in the most watched race so far in the post-Trump era, the governor's race in Virginia, polls have been closed now for an hour. The early results are showing Ralph Northam with 51% of the vote and Ed Gillespie with 48% of the vote. It is too early to call. Both gentlemen have just over about 500,000 votes. There's 43% of precincts in. But here's the thing. If you look at a lot of bellwether precincts, if you look at turnout projections, our own Steve Kornacki has been carefully looking at this, comparing apples to apples. Right now, Ed Northam appears to be, in terms of turnout and in margin, outperforming where he would need to be to win the state if the margins are to hold. So an encouraging early set of returns for Ed Northam and the Democrats after a lot of anxiety and wringing of hands about that race. We're going to have more from Virginia and elsewhere later in the show. We begin tonight with what has become a ritual for people closely associated with the president. Longtime Trump aide Keith Schiller going to Capitol Hill today to testify behind closed doors under oath before the House Intelligence Committee about the president's possible ties to Russia. Other than family, there's probably no one who's been closer to the president than Schiller, former NYPD officer who became head of security at Trump Tower in 2005 and who served as director of Oval Office operations before leaving the White House in September. Schiller has been Trump's body man, his confidant, and his gatekeeper, the man White House officials reportedly sought out when they wanted to know the president's mood. When Trump wanted a quarter pounder with cheese, it was Schiller who would head to McDonald's on a stealth fast food run. There were big tasks, too. Trump entrusted Schiller to hand-deliver his letter firing FBI Director James Comey. It was Schiller who removed journalist Jorge Ramos from that Trump press conference back in 2015. That's him there putting his hands on Ramos. It was also Schiller who ripped a sign away from a protester outside Trump Tower and then turned around and cold-cocked said protester when he tried to get it back.
Oftentimes you'll find in the city cops and firemen do a lot of side work, right? Yeah. So I said, I see some, light goes off. I said, bodyguard, I can do this. This guy's a bodyguard. I'm a bodyguard. Trust me, I'll show you. And, knowing what I had done over the years, right? I'm no stranger to putting my hands on people. Right? From way back. From way back.
Crucially, Schiller was with Trump when Trump traveled to Moscow back in 2013 for the Miss Universe pageant, and that is when the Steele dossier alleges that the Russians gathered compromising material about the future president. The White House was hopeful that Schiller, ever the loyal lieutenant, would knock down that dossier's claims. Lawyer Ty Cobb telling the Washington Post that the White House is delighted that Mr. Schiller will have an opportunity to shed some light on these scandalous allegations. But Schiller's questioning under oath comes one day after the release of Capitol Hill testimony by none other than former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. a man whose comments appear to corroborate some crucial parts of that dossier, including a claim that Page met with high-level Russian officials during a July 2016 trip to Moscow, something Page denied to me just last week. Did you brief anyone in the campaign when you got back?
I may have mentioned just a few sort of, things I heard, but nothing serious at all, yeah.
Well, people keep using these terms like serious or official, but you told them what you did and who you talked to.
What I said is that there's a lot of positive feedback. In general, on the street, the average person is really excited about
Donald Trump.
I think just in general about, future possibilities. So, I had no meetings, no serious discussions with anyone high up or at any, official capacity. So
let me ask you
this is just kind of man on the street,
Congressman Adam Schiff, who joins me momentarily, confronted Page during his testimony with an email Page sent to Trump campaign official J.D. Gordon, in which Page said he had received incredible insights and outreach from a few Russian legislators and senior members of the presidential administration here. Page then admitted to a brief conversation with, among others, Russia's deputy prime minister. Page also revealed that Steve Bannon had urged him not to appear on this very network. And he acknowledged lauding the Trump campaign for watering down the GOP platform on Ukraine, making it more palatable to Russia. Page, writing in an email to J.D. Gordon of the Trump campaign, quote, "As for the Ukraine amendment, excellent work." Gordon said in a statement he didn't see Page's email and insisted he isn't the one who cleared Page to go to Russia. Quote, "I discouraged Carter from taking the trip to Moscow in the first place because it was a bad idea. Since I refused to forward his speech request form for approval, he eventually went around me directly to campaign leadership." I'm joined now by Representative Adam Schiff of California, who, as the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, questioned both Carter Page and then Keith Schiller today. Congressman, let's start with Keith Schiller. Was he forthcoming today?
I can't really discuss interviews. We allow the witness to disclose whether they're interviewed or not, so I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
Can you tell me if he brought a lawyer or if he was there by himself?
We don't disclose the witnesses' participation. We leave it up to them to disclose if they choose, so I really can't, at this point, confirm whether he came in today.
Let's talk about Carter Page. What do you think you learned from Carter Page's very long testimony that we now have had the opportunity to look over?
Well, Chris, the first thing we learned, because I asked him about it right off the bat, was what he told you on the air just a few days ago was clearly not accurate. And indeed, what he'd been saying publicly for quite some time was not accurate. He represented to you and others that his meetings were, essentially with the man on the street. They weren't with high-level officials, that it was purely in his private capacity. But we learned within minutes of his interview in closed session that, in fact, he met with very high-level people. He did have private conversations. One of those was with the deputy prime minister of Russia itself. But more than that, that he wrote back to the campaign in a memo in the campaign's own format that said that as a result of these meetings and discussions, he had valuable insights and outreach to report to the campaign. That is completely inconsistent, obviously, with this being a purely private endeavor. So we learned the public representations weren't accurate. We also learned more detail about a second trip that he made to Russia later that year, as well as a third trip that he made to Hungary at the suggestion of the Hungarian ambassador, someone he met during the Republican convention.
One of the other items that you read to Mr. Page in your questioning, it's the first that we've heard of it, I think, publicly, was an email he wrote congratulating the campaign team on their machinations to insert that amendment or change the amendment in the Republican platform with regards to lethal weapons or lethal help to Ukraine. What do you think the significance of that is?
Well, I think these memos show a number of things. They show certainly that Carter Page was aware of the debate during the convention and the efforts by the Trump campaign to fight off an amendment that would have been stronger in terms of providing defensive weapons to Ukraine. They also indicate that higher levels of the Trump campaign were more than aware of his trip to Russia, including notifying now Attorney General Sessions, then Senator Sessions, about that trip. So
as well as his disclosure during testimony that he notified Sam Clovis of his trip to Russia. So a lot of the contacts that he made were represented to higher levels of the campaign, and that directly contradicts things that we've heard people like Corey Lewandowski say, Attorney General Jeff Sessions say, and others within the Trump campaign.
Carter Page has in multiple instances attempted to minimize meetings he may have had or did have. He admitted to me that he met Sergei Kislyak in Cleveland, but said it was very brief. He admitted to meeting the deputy prime minister, but said it was very brief. He said that he told Jeff Sessions that he was going to Russia, but it was it was in passing. Do you trust those characterizations?
Well, I don't think we can trust these characterizations because, of course...
All right, that was my interview previously recorded with Adam Schiff, but we are back here to make a call. We now have NBC's own Steve Jernacki, who joins me to talk about the return so far. Steve, what do we have out of Virginia?
Well, we have a winner. We have the Democrat, Ralph Northam. This was the polls were right, but maybe they even underestimated what's going on here. Ralph Northam, the Democrat, going to win this governor's race in Virginia. Big storyline that's emerging. We talked all last year about that split among white voters, right? The college-educated whites, the non-college whites, sort of a social class divide. Look, the story with Donald Trump's election last year was non-college whites in those critical battleground states. Well, the story tonight looks like it's the college-educated whites, the suburbanites looking right outside Washington, D.C. Look, this is Democratic territory traditionally right here in Virginia, but it was really big Democratic territory last year. They really turned hard against Donald Trump. Ed Gillespie's campaign was premised on two things. It was running up Trump-like margins in the southwest part of the state, but not getting creamed like Trump did in those college-educated suburbs of Washington, D.C. Let me take you very quickly through what happened, because to give you an example right here in Loudoun County, Ed Gillespie ran for the Senate here a few years ago. He won this county. Last year, Donald Trump won it by 17. Remember, the goal of Gillespie, don't get blown out like Trump. He got blown out worse than Donald Trump, 19 points in Loudoun County. Down here, Prince William County, when Ed Gillespie ran for the Senate, only lost it by 3 points. Last year, Trump lost by 21 points there. Tonight, 21 points. Same thing. How about right here? Ed Gillespie, Fairfax County, they're still counting the votes, only lost it by 18. Trump lost it by 35. You're getting Trump margins here, Trump backlash. The Trump backlash that we saw in places like this around the country, it has not subsided at all. It even expanded a little bit in Virginia, it looks like. When you get outside of Richmond, take a look here at Henrico County. This should be, this is a mid-teen rate. If you're Ed Gillespie, you want to lose this maybe 13, 14 points. It explodes 10 points more than that. These suburbs in Virginia, there is a lot of energy there. Looks like it's anti-Trump. We can debate, did the Gillespie campaign running on those Trump issues, did that exacerbate it all? Or was it just the anti-Trump energy that's been there since the election last year? But you are seeing it. Ed Gillespie, I don't want to see any of the numbers I just showed you, and you're seeing them all over the place tonight.
Steve, it was interesting, the Gillespie approach, which Steve Bannon had called Trumpism without Trump at one point, and there were two prongs to it. One prong got a lot of attention, which were the ads he was running. Those were things on keeping the Confederate statues up, about the Central American gang MS-13, one about Terry McAuliffe re-enfranchising felons, things that played in the kind of culture war terrain of Donald Trump. He was meanwhile sending these mailers to Northern Virginia, calling himself a son of an immigrant and talking about economic growth. And what I'm hearing from you is attempting to essentially pull off that two-track campaign did not work up in those places in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, and look, maybe it was ultimately an impossible thing that he was trying to pull off, but here was the dynamic that Ed Gillespie walked into was this. As a Republican, his background, obviously, he's sort of the establishment Republican traditionally. Well, his background, he did pretty well for a Republican up here when he ran for the Senate a couple years ago. He actually didn't do as well as Republicans should do maybe in the rural parts of Virginia. Now, last year, when Donald Trump was running, we were seeing, Trump get 75, 80, 85% in some of these counties. So what Gillespie was trying to pull off was the culture issues that he ran on so aggressively. He was trying to get that 85% in places down here. Doesn't look like he quite reached that number, but through the tactics you're talking about, he was still trying to be the Ed Gillespie of 2014, the Ed Gillespie of the Bush era up here. The voters didn't buy it at all. And again, this is going to be a debate, I think. Was there a backlash? Could it have worked without the campaign he ran? Or was this just set in stone? What we are seeing in North Northern Virginia tonight? Was this just set in stone by that election result last year? By Donald Trump winning, by Donald Trump being the president, a version of the president that he was as a candidate? Is Northern Virginia just locked into the same anti-Trump position it was on Election Day last year, maybe even a little bit more so? And if that's the case, and it's not about the tactics of Ed Gillespie, that could have very significant implications for 2018.
Yeah, and I want to make one more point, Steve, here about what was going on in Virginia, which was a lot of investment also in the races for House of Delegates. And there's a lot of delegate races that were contested. Democrats had for a long time not contested a lot of those seats, and they ran candidates in them, and we're getting some early returns that even members of GOP leadership who have been serving in their delegations for a very long period of time, now looking neck and neck, possibly some huge upsets happening in that race. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. Steve, if you'll stick around, because I want to come back and talk more about that. NBC's Garrett Hake is in the Ralph Northam event in Fairfax, Virginia, where I imagine folks are pretty excited. What's it like there, Garrett?
Yeah, Chris, as we and then CNN just called this race over the last few minutes, the crowd here went nuts. I don't know if you can see the room behind me, but it's not even entirely full yet. They just started letting attendees into this party a little while ago. I think even the Northam folks didn't expect to see the race turn as quickly and as decisively as it has, although they have been much more confident, the Northam campaign and the folks I've been talking to in Virginia, than I think national Democrats were all along. The line that I've been hearing from people in Northam's camp and from voters in Virginia today was they felt like Northam had an authenticity that connected with Virginia voters in a way that maybe national Democrats didn't quite appreciate. I mean, this is a guy with a Southern accent. This is a guy who talks slowly. This is not someone who fires up the room as some kind of natural bomb thrower resistance candidate, and yet he's been able to translate a lot of that vote while not turning off some of these more moderate counties and places that tend to lean a little bit more towards establishment Republicans. When you talk to Steve about Loudoun County, Prince William County, sort of the D.C. exurbs, the numbers that we're seeing Northam put up there have been huge. And the folks here attribute it a little bit to this sort of anti-Donald Trump, but also to the fact that they have, despite what national Democrats were talking about, what they felt like was a very good candidate for Virginia, a candidate with a legitimate Virginia background who was able to connect. And I think we're seeing that pan out in the numbers right now, Chris.
You know, it's interesting you say that about that room being partly empty, and I'll take you behind the curtain here. We were, as we were gaming out Election Day, Virginia elections get called notoriously late because usually Northern Virginia, which is a huge bulk of the votes, that comes in late. In fact, Hillary Clinton, the state was called for Hillary Clinton fairly late on election night a year ago, even when Donald Trump was shown being up in the actual vote count because of what was out in North Virginia. So this decisive victory this early, getting a call at 8:15, this is a huge win for the Democratic Party of Virginia and for a national Democratic Party that has spent the last 2 weeks absolutely lashing itself on the back in advanced preparation of a loss in Virginia and almost started down the pathway of the analysis of what did we do wrong. There's got to be a lot of exuberance and relief in that room.
There really is, Chris. And I'll tell you, I talked to Tom Perriello earlier today, who was the Democrat who lost to Ralph Northam in the primary. He's been very active, by the way, campaigning not just for Northam, but for all those House of Delegate candidates that you mentioned. And he said, you know, look, Democrats have been talking to themselves about how they need to get active in these off-year elections and these midterm elections in a serious way. Since at least 2010, he was hopeful this morning that they would start to see it tonight. And it looks like they have. And, you know, you mentioned those delegate races. One of the other theories here is that there's almost a reverse coattails effect here where Democrats just have not competed in a lot of these places in Virginia historically. And now they've got folks on the ballot. So even if you've got a House of Delegates candidate who may not do great, but if they've got a couple hundred of their friends and family who are going to come out and vote, it lifts a little bit in all these rural counties that for a long time Democrats had almost written off in places essentially sort of south and west of Richmond. Now all the rest of that is back in play, not to mention we're looking at a tiny fraction of Fairfax County, which is sort of the behemoth blue county here in Virginia, which comes in historically late and will be, I think, enormous based on the voters I talked to today.
Yeah, Garrett, thank you for that. We'll probably be checking back with you in the hour. That point you made about reverse coattails is something that the folks I know in Virginia had been hammering home, the activists and the sort of political operatives. And when we had the DNC chair Tom Perez on the other night, I believe last night, the weeks go by so fast, past. He said, look, we're competing in every House delegate race. We got a ton of people. And you were, Tom Perez, who's on the phone now, the DNC chair, you pointed to that as a key part of what you were doing in your role in the Democratic Party, investing in the state and investing in these House delegate races. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling incredibly optimistic. The author of the anti-transgender bathroom bill just got defeated by a woman named Danica Rome, a transgendered woman who is a spectacular candidate. The two Latino candidates, Elizabeth Guzman and Hala Ayala, are both ahead in their races. If elected, they will become the first two Latinas ever elected in the House of Delegates. The new Democratic National Committee is all about helping people up and down the ballot, Chris. And when you have such an authentic candidate at the top of the ticket as Ralph Northam, and when the number one issue in the election is health care, and you have a healer on the Democratic side and a divider on the Republican side, this is a really important night. And it's not only an important night for Virginia, but it's a blueprint for what we're doing everywhere, which is competing in every zip code, telling our story. And our story is that Democrats believe in health care for all. The story is that Democrats believe that we should be uniting our country, not dividing our country. That's exactly what Ralph Northam said. That's exactly what Phil Murphy said in New Jersey. And that's why we're winning up and down the ballot. And there's still more to come in Virginia.
You've got. I saw someone noting right now, and again, it's hard to keep track of all these House of Delegate races. But one of the things that happened in the Obama era, of course, was this sort of hollowing out of the bench. We saw Republicans take state house after state house after state house. It gave them control of things like gerrymandering of the congressional districts, which sort of further enmeshed their power. You've got a bunch of House of Delegate candidates. One, I just want a trans candidate who beat a Republican who wrote a trans bathroom bill. And there's also, I believe, a Marine veteran who identifies as a Democratic socialist who, if I'm not mistaken, is running competitively with someone in the House GOP leadership, right? The House GOP whip might lose to a socialist Marine veteran. Is that actually happening?
Well, there are a lot of remarkable things going on tonight in the House of Delegates races, and here's where it gets even better. I don't know whether we'll get to 17. That's the number we need. That's a tall order, but it's not beyond the pale given where things are moving right now. But it's important to know that there was a lawsuit filed because of the partisan gerrymander in Virginia, and we've already won that lawsuit. So a court is going to be redistricting next year to make the districts fair. So even with an unlevel playing field, look what we've been able to do tonight. And in the months ahead, a court will be redrawing lines in a way that will create fairness. Virginia is not a 66-34 state. It never was, but as a result of the 2009 election, that's what happened. And the illustration of this race, Chris, is these 2017, 2018 cycle races, these are 14, 13-year election cycles because these governors are going to control redistricting. That's why tonight is so important. It's a new day in Virginia, and it's a new day in America. It's a new Democratic National Committee.
All right, Tom Perez, we may be checking back with you. Thank you for hopping on the phone with us. I want to just reset for those who are just joining us on this, the first national election night in the Donald Trump era, and some good news so far for the Democratic Party, which was hoping for some good news after last year's results. You've got Phil Murphy, who is the Democratic candidate for governor. He is projected to be the winner in New Jersey. He's beating Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno, who is the lieutenant governor for Chris Christie, whose approval rating is around 15%. That was a heavy baggage for her to carry. Murphy heavily favored going down the stretch. He is projected to be the winner there. The one that had Democrats chewing their fingernails down to the bone was Virginia. Well, Ralph Northam, way ahead of anywhere where I think anyone thought it was going to be projected at 8:15, is the projected winner, with Northern Virginia still out, defeating Ed Gillespie, who won a narrow bid for Senate just 3 years ago. My colleague Chuck Todd is on the phone now. And Chuck, there was so much anxiety and focus on this race. What do you make of tonight's results?
Well, the data, actually, the results match the data. I think why there was so much anxiety that I noted, even with the people that were looking at the data and all of that on the Northam campaign themselves, they had their own anxiety, was because They were sitting in this exact same moment a year ago,
right?
On one hand, so there's a little bit of that going on, that anxiety. But frankly, even in Virginia, 4 years ago, if you remember, all the numbers pointed to this big McAuliffe win, and it turned out to be more of a nail-biter. Yep. And if you recall, I don't think we called that race until the 10 o'clock hour. We had to wait to see if Northern Virginia was going to perform like Northern Virginia before we could call that race. Tonight, what you're seeing is that the environment. It looks like a bad environment for Republicans, but you're not sure if the tactics are going to work. Going in, it looked like this was going to be a bad environment for them. But the question was, how much were the voters going to punish the Republican Party in Virginia for President Trump? I think we got an answer. This is a wipeout for the Democrats tonight. This looks like they're going to sweep all three of those statewide races, and they're going to have a good night on this. Right now, it looks like they're going to have a good night. Look, we'll see when all the returns are in, but this looks like this is going to be a big win for Democrats tonight. And I think you're going to have a lot of Republicans waking up tomorrow morning going, and the debate's going to be, is Trump that much of a problem? Or was Ed Gillespie not, the base knew he wasn't really Trump. Base knew he really wasn't of them. And I think that's going to be an interesting debate tomorrow morning in that postmortem on the right.
It's a great point, because one of the things we're going to see is turnout in sort of raw terms. What we did see today was that we had a high turnout in areas that are traditionally Democratic, particularly college-educated voters in Northern Virginia. Very big turnout numbers there. We're going to look at what those turnout numbers were in the Trump-heavy areas. Some of the early return I saw showed Gillespie doing the Trump kind of margins, but nowhere near the raw vote totals, to your point about whether he was able to get those people out, and particularly in these off-year elections, as we learned during the Obama era, who turns out their voters becomes, the determining factor in a lot of cases.
Well, especially in the off year, right? Very much so. And I think, for instance, that's what 4 years ago taught us a lot, which was when that was a base versus base, and you realize, boy, that and you sort of hinted that the Dem base was not fully enthused, and that's why McAuliffe perhaps narrowly won. This is a different story. The turnout numbers, Arlington County, Fairfax County, and which is basically the heart and soul of when you hear us talk about Northern Virginia. For those of you not familiar with Northern Virginia, those are two massive counties population-wise. And they hit their 2013 turnout numbers. I think Arlington County did it at 3:30, a full 3.5 hours before polls closed. And Fairfax County did it about 5 o'clock, 2 hours before polls closed. So lower turnout in those Trump areas, higher turnout in Northern Virginia. It's going to make that debate inside the party actually that much more complicated.
And tonight is the first night. I remember two big moments in the early Obama years. Of course, Scott Brown's special election, which was a huge wake-up call, and then the next year when Chris Christie won that race in New Jersey, in solid blue New Jersey, and that was sort of the beginning of the beginning of what will become the Tea Party wave in 2010, but also the beginning of sort of reckoning with what the political backlash to the Obama era would look like. And we've had a bunch of special elections so far in which Democratic victories didn't materialize, at least in the congressional level, and a question about whether some similar kind of pendulum swing was in the offing, which I think was the source of that anxiety. And tonight, at least, just looking at these returns, it looks like the terrain broadly has shifted from a year ago.
Chris, if a transgender candidate wins and the Democratic Socialist candidate wins, I think that tells you that, yes, I think the terrain is there. Yes. I am not convinced that most of the voters that voted in that race and probably knew about the transgender issue. I don't know that that's the case, right? How familiar were voters? Or how many of them went in there and it's just say, look, I'm looking for the D right now because, I'm punishing the R's, or I'm coming out. Whatever the reason is, that's the stuff that's going to give Paul Ryan heartburn tonight, frankly, and thinking about how 2018 is going forward. And then what I'm going to be curious to see, Chris, is do Democrats, and the next time you talk to Tom Perez, you got to ask him this because there's not been a lot of evidence. if Democrats what's the lesson they take away here from Virginia?
Oh, absolutely.
And how do they apply it to Alabama?
Yep.
Do they try to make a point in Alabama now, realizing there is some terrain there? Don't walk away from it.
That is a great point. A huge implications for what the Democratic Party decides to do with Doug Jones, their candidate running against Roy Moore in that special election in the Senate in Alabama. Chuck Todd, thanks for that. Appreciate it. I'm joined now by Hardball host, the one and only Chris Matthews. Chris, what are you making of this?
Well, I think I just want to add to that. It's about morale and the people working in Doug Jones' campaign down in Alabama, people working hopefully against Kelly Ward out in Arizona, and of course the Nevada, anywhere where it's conceivable that a Democrat can win, they're going to be thinking victory tonight. They're going to think this is a switch, as Norman Mailer called it, a switch of the cosmos, when everything just shifts. And voters have very crude tools to use to send a signal. Basically, when there's no presidential election, they got to grab every weapon they've got and send the signal they don't like this president and his behavior. They just don't like it. They think it's not what we want as a leader in this country. And I do think the fact that the people at all the lines today, all the lines of the ballot, they said, I'm going to take this line and use that against Trump. I only got a few grenades to throw. I'm going to throw them all. And I do think if I'm working down there in Alabama in a Senate race I thought was a long shot, I'm now thinking, hey, this is doable. I'm going to work my butt off. Same thing in Arizona, same thing in Nevada. If I were the RNC right now, I'd be thinking, get the people at the walls right now and start protecting everything you got, because everything's vulnerable now. Yep. And the reason I say that is because even with the issue of the monuments, and I understand the sense. I went to school at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I understand the sensitivity of people about the South and its history. It's not all about slavery. The war was about slavery. But the history, the texture of the South, the whole thing. I understand where 60% of the voters told our exit pollsters that they'd want to keep the monuments, but they didn't vote that way.
That's right. Yep.
It's so interesting. They voted on health care.
That's
they
right.
They voted on things that mattered to their lives.
I don't know if we have that board up, but the top issue for voters was health care, and a lot of people noticed that Gillespie was trying to make this race about. I mean, he even sent a mailer out with a football player kneeling. Oh
yeah, that worked.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because look, Republicans and Democrats have learned how hot and how much it burns when you touch the healthcare stove. And let's not forget that Republicans took a run at repealing Obamacare and failed, and still may be paying the political consequences without a bill to show for it.
Right, they're still threatening. And as long as they threaten, the Democrats are going to have that issue on their side. I think the only bad news for Democrats, and this is really reaching for bad news because there really isn't any, the notion that somehow all politics is a seesaw, that if Trump goes really down in the polls, then Democrats are going to start to look good. And you got to be careful about that. I think Democrats should have a morale boost like they've never had tonight, but they have to say, now we got to get out there and sell something. Yep. We got to sell something, whether it's a better health care program, a jobs program, or something. I think they got to be, but that's just me talking. I think it's just a good night for the Democrats. I don't want to take any of the joy out of it. They beat the hell out of this guy who pretended to be a Trumpster. Ed Gillespie is a Washington lobbyist. He's way down knee deep or head deep in the swamp. He's part of the problem Trump ran against. He is a Catholic U grad from New Jersey. I'm sorry. He's not Stonewall Jackson when he tried to run as his grandson. It just didn't work. And people are not stupid.
Well, Ed Gillespie, proud son of Emerson Township, and guarantor of the legacy of Robert E. Lee. Chris Matthew, thanks for making time.
Hey, it's great to have you on. Thank you.
All right, big night, big election night. We've got some big results. People are still just processing the scope of what's happened in Virginia, because this was projected to be a nail-biter. It is not. It is over. It appears the projected winner, of course, Ralph Northam. But down ballot, Democrats would have to pick up 18 seats in that House of Delegates, 18 seats to flip that chamber. That seemed absolutely impossible just a few weeks ago. They still might do that. That is still a possibility. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. We're going to keep our eyes on both headquarters in Virginia. We've got some other races coming in. Much more ahead. Don't go anywhere. All right, it is election night in America, the first national election since Donald Trump was elected president. We've got some calls if you're just joining us. In New Jersey, Phil Murphy is a projected winner there. He's the Democrat. He's running against the Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno. And in Virginia, what was projected to be a nail-biter and conventional wisdom in the political press was that Ralph Northam's going to blow it. Ed Gillespie's going to win, but no, very early in this evening, 8:15, we called it for Ralph Northam. He's up by 5 points. We've still got a lot of votes to come in from Northern Virginia. That's going to be a significant margin. Not only that, it appears Democrats have picked up at least maybe a dozen seats in the House of Delegates. There's a Medicaid expansion item on the ballot in Maine. There's some early returns from that we will be looking at. So right now it's looking like the best night for Democrats in an election since that night last year. I'm joined now by Donna Brazile. Maybe you've heard of her, the former interim chair of the DNC. She's author of a new book that also maybe you've heard of called Hacks, the Inside Story of the Break-ins, breakdowns that put Donald Trump in the White House. You have been making a lot of news with this book.
Yeah, but Chris,
a lot of people angry at
it. Chris, there are a lot of people tonight who are celebrating what's happening in Virginia.
You're celebrating.
Celebrating what's happening. Look, I went.
They were going to come for you.
Well, they were
going to blame you. if Northam, I already saw people writing the story about Donna Brazile being responsible for depressed Virginia turnout among
Democrats. A month ago, I went down there to help raise money. I went out 2 weeks ago to kick off a canvassing campaign. Tonight's story is about these delegate races. I mean, everyone was out there 2 weeks ago, out there knocking on doors. I'm proud of the Virginia Democratic Party. I'm proud of the New Jersey Democratic Party. I'm proud of what's going on in Maine. Most importantly, I am proud that Tom Perez is investing in down ballot races. That's what we should have been doing last year. We're doing it now, and that's great.
Yeah, you know, we had Tom on last night. We had him on just tonight. He was talking about that. What does this mean? I mean, I want to talk about the book, but it's funny now to sort of have passed through the curtain of time to after the election, because so much of the kind of controversy around it was this I think was an epiphenomenon of the nervousness that people had about this race in Virginia.
Of course. Yeah.
What does this mean for the Democratic Party, these returns tonight?
Turnout, turnout, turnout. In off-season elections, non-presidential years, you know Democratic turnout plummeted. This year, what we're seeing in Northern Virginia, Henrico, down there in the Tidewater area, we see Democrats coming out. They came out in Henrico, which is Richmond. They're coming out in College Town. This is a good sign that the Democratic Party is coming back to life.
So you were on the ground there. You're talking about those down-ballot races. Tom Perriello, who lost that primary contest, former Virginia congressman, was spearheading part of the effort to get those delegate races going. Do you think this is a kind of bottom-up coattails that's happened here? I mean, the national analysis is going to be this is an anti-Trump vote.
Of course, and it should be. This is the first year after the presidential election. As you well know, the president, sort of controls the tempo. This is about those down-ballot races. I mentioned this in my book. I talked about the energy that you need in order to win at the top. You got to get the grassroots involved. You got to get people to carry your yard signs or wear your buttons. And what I saw in Virginia, I saw a lot of young people working for state delegate races. That's the energy.
There's a question about a year after that election.
Yes.
And we'll get to some of the stuff in the book. But a year after the election, there's a real question about, what is the Democratic Party? Fill in the blank. The Democratic Party is the party that
believes in not just the working class, but we believe that our party stands for opportunity for all. We want to level the playing field. We want every American to be able to get a head start in life and a healthy start. That's who we are. And that's what you heard Ralph talking about in Virginia. That's what you're seeing in Maine. And that is what Doug Jones is talking about in Alabama.
But wasn't that Hillary Clinton's message, too? Wasn't that the message of, I mean, the thing about that message is that sounds like a message that was the message of a party that got absolutely slaughtered in down-ballot races in the Obama era.
Chris, what we heard last year is she likable enough? What we heard was the sound of Donald Trump tweeting at 6:15 a.m. and the media blowing every tweet into a big major story. We didn't see all of the policy positions she put out. We didn't hear her message to working class. What we heard was, of course, the sound of 140 characters on a keyboard. I do believe that the Democratic Party will be able to bring that message home next year when we have 36 gubernatorial races, 33 senatorial races. That's the ball game. But we can't focus on 2020 until we can get past 2018.
So, but this is an interesting point because, the top issue, if we can show that again, the top issue in our election, in our exit polls today was health care.
That's right.
And part of what happened, I think, in that last campaign was it was a very policy-free campaign in many ways. Donald Trump made it very policy-free. The media, I think, helped in that.
I think the media helped a lot in making it, it was about what I call the soundbite.
The spectacle.
That's right, not the substance.
But does it, healthcare seems to me...
Look at that.
Yeah, and this is an issue that the Democrats have the luxury in some ways of defending the status quo.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to change people's health care. How central do you think that is to the party right now?
I think that's very important, especially at a time when the American people understand that the Republicans are trying to repeal Obamacare, but not replace it with something that's better. I think the Democrats will have to embrace not just Obamacare and health care, but we got to talk about bread and butter issues. The American people are still feeling anxious about the economy. If we go back to what I call those simple 3 words of opportunity and fairness and leveling the playing field, maybe 6 words, I think Democrats can win in 2018.
But that's, the issue there strikes me is that may be true, that Democrats want a level playing field and opportunity and fairness. But here's the thing. This economy is not delivering raises for people. It's the fundamental truth about this economy. It's the truth in the Republican administration, and it's true in a Democratic administration, right? This economy, it can grow at 2-3%. It can get unemployment down to 4%. It can have all these statistics that look great from 30,000 feet, but my paycheck is not getting bigger.
That is something.
Do Democrats have an answer for people when they say, what will you do for that?
I think that has to be the central platform that the Democrats will put forward next year. How do we grow wages? How do we expand opportunity? If we cannot walk and chew gum and let middle America know that we're on their side and that we're the champions, then they won't come out. They didn't hear that message last year.
Well, that's the question, right? It's like, well, if you want to say to people, I want to raise your wages, right? What does that mean? Like, what is a Democrat going to do to raise my wages?
Well, first of all, you saw in the last midterm election, you had all of these states, including Arkansas, Ohio, they voted to raise the minimum wage. People want a wage. They want their wages raised. I think Democrats have to speak to those issues, but they also have to speak to bread and butter issues. They are going to reject Donald Trump, but we cannot just run on a platform of, we don't like Donald Trump. We got to run on a platform that says what we stand for.
We should note that Ralph Northam endorsed a $15 an hour minimum wage in Virginia. And interestingly enough, Ed Gillespie did not attack him very much on that, which I thought was indicative. Donald Trump now has 280 characters, as you can see on your screen there, and from halfway across the world, he said, Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before. The tire marks across the face of Ed Gillespie, Washington lobbyist and proud son of Emerson
Totally
Township.
predictable. That's the way, you saw what happened in Alabama. When his candidate didn't win, he just rolls right over you.
What does this mean for Alabama?
I think Democrats need to go all in and trying to win Alabama. They have to win by not just getting Democrats, but they have to get independents and some Republicans. If they can do that,
you can't win a statewide race in Alabama with just Democrats.
That's right. You got. Look at
that spreadsheet. It's not going to work.
Look, I'm from Louisiana. I understand, but we got John Bell Edwards in Louisiana. We got John Bell Edwards because we had a kind of candidate who could appeal to the middle and also get some Republicans. We need. I think Doug Jones can do that now.
And hundreds of thousands of people in Louisiana have Medicaid and health care because of John Bell Edwards and because that was something that he ran on in that
state. And you know
state.
what I did in 2015 when Democrats were criticizing? I went back home and I helped him. Okay,
talk about criticizing. So you've been in the middle of this maelstrom, and we should.
And by the way, Chris, I love my party, and I don't care.
You kicked the crap out of your party in this book.
It's not the crap. I want to kick my party back into gear because I want to win in 2018.
Well, let me ask.
I want to win in 2020.
I know that, but the question is, why are you doing what you're doing in this book, and why are you doing it now? I mean, and again, we're talking about this on the other side of what looks tonight to be an incredibly good night for the Democratic Party.
This is my form. This is my autopsy.
Why would you publish an excerpt in Politico that uses the word rigged about the election?
I didn't publish it, and I'm not.
You did publish it. The word byline on it.
Yeah, of course it is. Look, I use the word rigged because that's the word Donald Trump used to describe our election results. The word I prefer to use, and I said in the book when I talked to Bernie, I prefer to say cancer. I did not like the cancer, okay? I call it cancer because we did not rig the primaries.
It cracks me up that your defense is like, I didn't say rigged. I said cancer. Well, but cancer's pretty bad.
No, rig is, yeah, of course cancer is bad, and God knows we want to get rid of cancer. But the question that I had to answer, and I wanted to report back to Bernie, was the process rigged? And I did a forensic examination, and I came to the conclusion Hillary Clinton won the primary. Okay? She got more votes, more delegates. She won more states. She won the primary.
Okay.
But what I found that I did not like, I call it cancer, and I said it's unacceptable.
And what is that? What is that? And then tell me about how that applies to the party right now.
Well, before a primary is over with, I think the Democratic Party must be non-partial, okay? And I'm talking about the staff and the operations. And when you have one campaign, and mind you, this campaign bailed the Democratic Party out. This campaign provided the Democratic Party with resources, continued to help us with resources, and I found that objectionable because I couldn't spend money as party chair. It got in my way of doing my job, and I opposed it.
Is that... Are the sort of dependencies that you felt were biased that existed there, are those gone now? Is the party an independent
absolutely.
operator?
I left the party. We cleaned all of that up. I left the party in good hands. Tom Perez has done a great job with Keith and Karen and Mike and all of the other officers.
Who's the future of the Democratic Party?
Well, you know, I won't know that until 2020. I'm not running. I don't know who plans to run, but I can tell you this much. We have enough seats open at the table to allow new voices and new faces to come within the Democratic Party. I'm proud of my party. I'm proud of my party tonight. I'll be proud of my party tomorrow as well.
Do you think... what do you think is the big lesson that Democrats have learned from a year ago? I mean, everyone's writing these one-year obits, right? And where were you a year ago?
That's my obit.
This is yours.
My autopsy, my obit.
Autopsy. And there's some great stuff in here, which we're on election night, so I would commend people to read the stuff about the hacking, because I thought it was very important. And really important in a broader context as people think about the new world we live in which your emails might be public at any time.
Thank
you. What is the big one? You know, you got to think about. Everyone wants to refight that fight in 2016. People were very invested in it. The excerpt came out, but you really got to think about the future, both for American politics and for the Democratic Party. What is your big lesson for the future of the Democratic Party?
My biggest frustration, if you want to know what I went to bed with every night last year, I couldn't help enough candidates in non-battleground states. I couldn't send posters to non-battleground states. I saw someone today criticize me for sending money to Chicago. I sent money to Chicago because I wanted to help Tammy Duckworth. And the form of money I sent was robocalls with President Obama. I sent money to my home state of Louisiana because we had elections. Yes, I raised money, and then I went out and told state parties I want to help you. I don't want any state, whether you live in Alaska or my home state of Louisiana, to go without resources and trying to win elections. I'm proud of Virginia because the Democratic Party stood up and they gave money not just to the top of the ticket, but they gave money to all of those delegate races. That's the story tonight.
As for the story of the night, I think you could do worse than looking at, I believe her name is Danica Rome.
Yes.
She will be the first, I believe, the first trans state legislator in Virginia and possibly in the entire country, if I'm not mistaken, certainly in Virginia. She'd be a GOP rep by the name of Bob Marshall, who's in leadership, who refused to debate her, who refused to call her by her proper gender,
absolutely,
she. That happened tonight. That is a earth-shattering result. It speaks to what you're talking about this sort of need to contest at every level.
Grassroots energy. She was not written off. She was embraced by the Democratic Party, and money and resources were sent her way. Thank you.
Donna Brazil, who is pretty happy tonight for a variety of reasons, but not the least of them, no one's going to be blaming her for Ralph Northam losing. The book is called Hacks. Thank you for being here. Let's go back to Steve Kornacki at the board for the latest. Steve, what are things looking like now?
Yeah, look, we'll go a little deeper than just the governor's race, but to update you, by the way, keep an eye on this margin because they're still tallying the vote. There's still some vote to come in from Northern Virginia where Northam has just been, owning it tonight. But look at this, up to 7 points right now. Remember, last year, the margin in the presidential race, it was Hillary Clinton 50 to 44, a 6-point win. Right now, Democrats up by 7. Again, the story there continues to be, we can zoom in and show you, in Northern Virginia, this is higher than the anti-Trump level that we saw in 2016 in a lot of these places. You can take a look here, for instance. Look, we still got vote coming in Fairfax County. You see Northam by 35. That was the margin for Hillary Clinton. Take a look here in Arlington. Look at this, a 61-point margin right now, 80% for the Democrat. That is better than Hillary Clinton did last year. Take a look. Alexandria, Hillary Clinton got 76% here. Northam getting 78%. So he is improving on what Hillary Clinton got. And what Hillary Clinton got in this area was exceptionally high for a Democrat. But the issue here in Virginia right now is becoming more than just the governor's race. It's a question of, will this margin, this much larger than expected Democratic margin in the governor's race, trickle down to other offices? Let me show you. We had a call a few minutes ago in the Attorney General race. The Democrat, this is closer, a little bit closer than the governor's race. The Attorney General, Mark Herring, he was running for re-election. He has been re-elected. We've called that one in the last few minutes. Here, this one is outstanding. This is it is not outstanding. It's been called since I came up here. Justin Fairfax, the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor. You can see closer than the governor's race, but he is now going to win this race. So the Democrats will win the governor's election. They will win the Attorney General's election. They will win the lieutenant governor's election, all three of the statewide elections. And that leaves the big suspenseful thing here right now. That is the question of the House of Delegates. Who thought we'd be talking about the House of Delegates? But Democrats set this up. Democrats right now coming tonight down 66-34 in the House of Delegates. I'm going to put the numbers up on the screen. 66 Republicans coming in tonight, 34 Democrats. They're all up, all 100 seats. So the Democrats need a net gain of 17. Coming in tonight, nobody said 17 was even possible. Maybe they'd pick up a few. Here's what we know right now. It's a fluid situation. Democrats so far have picked up 6 Republican-held seats in the House of Delegates. Remember, the magic number is 17. 6 they've picked up. Before I came up here 3 minutes ago, might have changed since then. They led in Republican-held seats in 12. Wow. 6 plus 12, you get 18. If is a huge if, but if that holds, wow, that's unthinkable coming in tonight. A win of the House of Delegates for the Democrats. That's what we're really looking at right now.
We should note the background context here, Steve, is this is a state that has a Democratic governor that has gone for the Democratic presidential candidate in 3 successive elections with a 66-34 imbalance in the House of Delegates. That gerrymandering was just struck down by a court, and you can sort of see the mismatch between the way the state is voted at the statewide level and the margin there, but that may be coming to close tonight. Certainly that gap is going to narrow. Steve Kornacki, thanks for being with me at the board. With me now, I have David Ignatius, a columnist for the Washington Post, who, I was reminding everyone that it was your column about Michael Flynn talking to Sergei Kislyak about sanctions that was the first domino that's brought us to where we are. I'm glad to have you here.
A long time ago.
Yes, it seems like a long time ago. I'm glad to have you here because on a very, very busy night with a lot going on, the president, who just tweeted about it, Ed Gillespie, is in South Korea, where he is set to give an address to their main legislative chamber about North Korea. It's a pretty high-stakes address, given the tenor of the rhetoric so far. What do you think is going to happen tonight?
I think President Trump will try to reassure South Koreans who've been really nervous. His rhetoric, the little rocket man stuff, I think really has put South Koreans on edge. American military presence in South Korea has always been controversial, and so he has a significant job of trying to reassure folks there who are under the gun, quite literally, that he's thinking about them, he understands them.
War planners estimate that any open hostilities between the U.S. and South Korea and North Korea would result in somewhere in hundreds of thousands of casualties within the first hour, I think some people predict. This is a war there would be catastrophic, obviously, for the peninsula, and the folks there know it. Do you expect his rhetoric to sound different than it did in, say, at the UN General Assembly?
I'll be curious whether we hear some of the belligerent talk before that audience. The importance of this trip is that if Trump can move from Japan to South Korea to Beijing and have support for diplomacy in each capital, the chance of having a unified position towards Kim Jong-un, towards North Korea, is greater. I think everybody wants that. So in that sense, it's important to roll each of these together and have a quadripartite front. We're all worried about what comes next after this trip is over.
Do you think other countries, there's some great reporting about how North Koreans are viewing all this. There's a great piece in the New Yorker on this. Do you think that allies like Japan and other nations like China Do you think they feel like they have a handle on how seriously to take the president's rhetoric on North Korea?
I think the president's rhetoric is mystifying to people around the world. You know, one thing I was thinking tonight, watching the election results, is that for a world that is really scratching its head and wondering how dominant is Trump, you know, how should we take these polls in which he appears to be unpopular with the public? These are significant results that tell people in foreign capitals there is something resilient in American politics. So, you know, I think don't underestimate the degree to which people all over the world are focusing on our political fever and wondering what's happening in America. So I think tonight, as important as it is as a domestic story, it does have international repercussions.
So you think there will be international headlines tomorrow and prominent ones across the world about a Virginia gubernatorial race?
I don't want to say that they're going to be, you know, top headlines, but I'd be surprised if every correspondent for major foreign newspapers doesn't talk about what does this tell us about where America is. There's been real concern. Where's America heading? Is this the country that we know? How much is it changing? And here, you know, here's a sign that, you know, there is. Chris Matthews earlier used the phrase, you know, the kind of balancing process, the springboard that's at work in American politics. This tells the world that that there is a American politics.